More than 100 fighters I would cut right now. The UFC roster is getting way too big. Fighters that are inside of the top 15 are not able to fight 3 times a year. They're only able to fight once or twice. We need to cut the scraps off of the bottom of the UFC, every weight class, male and female, and just slice it. Slice that bottom quarter of the UFC and give the ranked fighters, the top 25, top 30 fighters that are putting on shows and are really, really high level. Let them fight. Let them have more opportunities. There are, 52 weeks in a year. Not all of those weeks have a UFC fight night. There's like 45, 40-something UFC fight night cards every single year. There are 11 or 12 fights on each one of those cards. You could do 12 times 45. Again, I don't know the exact math on that, but 10 times 45 is 450. You got the 2 times 45 is 90. And you got 540. That's my quick math for you today. 540 fights. That is, 1,080 fighters actually competing in separate instances. And there are 600 plus UFC fighters, which means if everybody got their fight, if everybody got an even distribution, everybody would fight 1.5 times every year. With the current UFC roster size, every fighter on the active roster right now would be fighting less than a fight and a half per year. Some would fight 1 time, some would fight twice, and that is why we're getting guys that are ranked fighting once a year. They're not injured, they just can't find fights. Song Yadong literally could not find a fight for, forever. I mean, they were trying to get him on Macau in November, then in December, then they were trying to get him in January, then he's getting pushed to February, but we're having these prelim fighters that are fighting on the prelims. Why not just get Song Yadong on there? Let him fight, cut off the scraps, and the higher ranked guys will have more availability to compete and fight more often than they actually are. You can see Nick Diaz on my screen. What is he doing on the roster? What is he doing on the roster? Again, he's a big name, sure, but he's on the roster and he could take a spot on a main card UFC pay-per-view over Mike Mallet. I don't know. Maybe Mike Mallet wants to fight on this card, but instead they put Nick Diaz on there and he can't fight on the card anymore because the card's full. Now we got to wait for Mike Mallet to fight, who's young, who's in his prime, who's improving. So cut Nick Diaz, get him out of the UFC. We got 108 more. 108 more that I'm going to cut. Nick Diaz, see you later. GFL, here you come. Go freaking fight in your brother's organization. Fight Inc. I don't even know what the heck. Like, come on. Leave the UFC. You're not taking the MMA or the UFC seriously. Let's cut them. Let's make some room for active fighters who want to fight. Then we got Chris Barnett. Now, I'm not happy by saying to cut Chris Barnett. I'm not at all happy with this. I love Chris Barnett. He's a fun fighter. But he's 38 years old. He gets injured super, super often. Like, this alone right here. He got the win over Jake Collier, knockout, John Vellante knockout, got knocked out by Kennedy. This is all fine and dandy. 2-2 in the UFC in this current stint. 2-3, my fault. Which that alone is an amazing record. But, I might keep him in the UFC because he's a fun fighter. But, the cancellations, man. Barnett withdrawing from Chase Sherman. Barnett withdrawing from Usman. Waldo Cortez Acosta. That time it wasn't his fault. That's the time it wasn't his fault. Then he withdrew from Junior Tafa. And then he fights Kennedy Nzechukwu and he gets injured in that fight as well. He's too injury prone. He's pulling out of a lot of fights recently in the UFC. And I know some of it's not his fault. I mean, he's just, his body's wearing down as he's getting older. But yeah, I mean, the heavyweight roster could be having Tai Tuivasa fight. Could be having a Derek Lewis on that card instead of him canceling a lot of these fights, and maybe Usman's not able to get another fight on that card, or they have to rebook it for a later day, kind of ruining a lot of things. So he's got a losing record in the UFC. He's exciting, but too many cancellations. I'm sorry, Chris Barnett. Then we do have, is it going to go back? Is it going to let me go back? Unshieldably. You know, he sucks. I'm going to be straight up with you. He's 30 years old. He's in his prime. 7-2 is not a UFC caliber record. I'm just going to say that right now. That's first off. 2 knockout losses in a row to a guy, again, that's not in the UFC, and then killing Salkilt. Only win against a featherweight, Jekka Saraji, who is also 1-2 in the UFC, and who's also on this list, let's just be honest. Jekka's not good. Like, let's just, come on, 2 knockout losses. Let's not give him another fight. Let's cut him from the UFC and get 3 wins. Let's get to an even 10. 10 wins, 2 losses. Get 3 finishes on the regional scene of India against some bums. Maybe then you can come back to the UFC, but come on. Do we really need to see? I'm going to pull it up. Just for argument's sake here. The UFC lightweight division. Again, please don't take mind to some of my rankings, which may not make sense to you. But we got how many lightweights right now? 91 fighters in the UFC lightweight division. And we got a lot of really, really good ones. This top 35, Ignacio Guram, Elvis Brenner, Mike Davis, all of these guys. Like, I would much, much rather see Mikdebek Oralbai on the prelims. Elvis Brenner, Guram be more active. Guram's been looking for a fight for a while. That's a great example. Great example right there. Guram Kutateladze, 13-4, exciting fighter, 2-2 in the UFC. Beat Gamrot, who's ranked, lost to Damir, who's a top 10 former guy, lost to Brenner in a banger, beat Vucenic in a banger. Last fight was in August, September, October, November, December, January, February. That's 6 months ago, and he's been wanting to fight in February. Now he wants to fight in March. He's looking for a fight, and he can't get anything booked. But Anshul Jubli is able to easily get a fight booked on UFC 312. I would have much rather Guram just gotten a fight. UFC 312 could have been a better card if we had Guram versus Kanan. That's just an example. Why is Anshul Jubli taking the place of these fighters that are looking for fights? I want to see Guram fight. I'm looking forward to see him fight again. But he's not able to get his fights because, well, Anshul Jubli is taking his place. Or, I don't know, we'll go on to the other lightweights on the list, but they're taking their place. Anshul, not UFC caliber. What is he doing on the roster? I don't know. Cut him. Next, we got Matt Schnell. He said he was retired. But he's coming back. Ladies and gentlemen, he's fighting Jimmy Flick on April 26th. I don't know why. I mean, he probably has a pretty lucrative contract with the UFC, making a decent amount of money because of how highly ranked he was. Is him versus Jimmy Flick really going to boost ticket sales? Is it really going to do anything? Can't you do one of these undefeated fighters in that UFC flyweight division instead? Like, let me go down. I want to really hammer this down as the main reason. Azat Maksum, Hyun-Sung Park, Dong-Hoon Choi. Those are 3 examples right there. Dong-Hoon Choi, Hyun-Sung Park. Who's the other one I just said? Azat Maksum. Hyun-Sung Park just had a cancellation at UFC 312. His opponent pulled out because he missed weight and, he wasn't able to compete. He hasn't been rebooked since. And they're giving Matt Schnell this fight against Jimmy Flick on this card, UFC Fight Night, Michelle Pereira, Abus, all of these fights. Wouldn't any of you guys out there, comment down below, would you rather see Matt Schnell, Jimmy Flick? Matt's just going to win this fight, lose this fight, and retire. Jimmy's going to win this fight, lose this fight, and probably retire. Or would you rather see undefeated 9-0 Hyun-Sung Park on the prelims, this up-and-coming star and prospects from South Korea, fight Jimmy Flick? Cut Matt Schnell, and you can do Hyun-Sung Park on this card, and that'll look a lot better. You look at the card, 3-4 very, very fun fights on the main card. You look at the prelims, and you got undefeated Malcolm Wellmaker, and you got undefeated Hyun-Sung Park. Like, we're just making cards more quality. By making these cuts, we're just going to make cards way more quality. So, cut Matt Schnell. Then we got Kevin Jousset. I know a lot of you guys are going to disagree on this one. He's 2-2 in the UFC. Beat Kiefer Crosby, who's also on this list. He's getting cut. Beat Kanan Song, who's also on this list. He's getting cut. He got knocked out by Brian Battle, who is not a powerful puncher. Then he lost to Jonathan Mikulev, a UFC debutant who lost on the regional scene less than a year ago. Kevin Jousset, not necessarily a powerful guy in his own right, submitted Kiefer Crosby, but doesn't really have a crazy amount of power in his hands. A decisionator on the regional scene and kind of in the UFC as well. Didn't really show any finishing ability in Kanan and the Brian Battle and the Mikulev fight. Let's cut him. He's 31 years old. I could go on to the welterweight rankings, and I'm positive. Give me an hour. I could find a better suited French welterweight on the regional scene to step in and take his place. 2 losses in a row. He's not going to become a star. He's 31. He's already in his prime. This is the best he's looked, and he's on a 0-2 in his last 2 fights. Yeah, cut him. Then we got Chelsea Chandler. This is one of the ranked fighters I have on the list. I don't think there's any more. There could be, though. I mean, I think this is the only ranked fighter on the list. Chelsea Chandler. Chelsea. Now, she's got a winning record in the UFC, but she's 34 years old. That's 1. And 2, all right, 2-2. So she doesn't have a winning record, but she's 34 years old. She's never made weight at 135 pounds. This is a featherweight fight. This was a catchweight 140. These two are bantamweight fights. There's no featherweight division anymore. There is no featherweight division. She had a bantamweight fight with Josiane, missed weight. She had a bantamweight fight with Yana Santos, missed weight by 5 pounds. If we're having unserious people in the rankings when they can't even make weight, for the weight class that they're in their rankings for, has a 6-3 record, bye. See you later, out of the UFC. Because, again, we can look at the women's bantamweight division, and we could find girls that are, a little bit more serious about fighting and making weight. We could have a Montserrat Rendon fight. We could have a Melissa Mullins fight. Where's Melissa Mullins been? Put Melissa Mullins in instead of Chelsea Chandler. And you got a better, younger, more disciplined, better record fighter to fight on the card. Why put Chelsea Chandler there? Bad record, older, can't make weight. Cut her. Bye-bye, Chelsea Chandler. We move on. Don'Tale Mayes. Come on. Losing record in the UFC. Not a finisher. Yeah, he knocked out Arlovsky. Decision, a current light heavyweight who's not in the UFC anymore. Decision, Roque Martinez. Yeah, he finished Josh Parisian. Lost to Hamdi. That got overturned, though. And he's been finished countless times. Lost to not in the UFC, not in the UFC, not in the UFC. He's losing to not in the UFC guys. He's beating not in the UFC guys. His record in the UFC is 4-6-1. Like, what are we doing? He's not an exciting guy. He's 33 years old. Cut him. Cut him. All right, let's move on. Thomas Peterson, again. Thomas Peterson, I think he's 1-2 in the UFC. Got a win over Muhammad Usman, and that's about it. Lost to Jamal Pogues, again, not in the UFC. Got knocked out by Gaziev. He's 1-2. He's not really super exciting with his wins. Muhammad Usman fight wasn't a fun fight. Jamal Pogues fight wasn't a fun fight. And only reason Shamil Gaziev fight was fun was because of Shamil, not because of Thomas. So 29 years old, 9-3, not an amazing record. Get 3 or 4 wins on the regional scene. You're still young, 29. Get a few wins on the regional scene. And I would say you could re-sign him in a few years. Go on the regional scene, get 3-4 wins, good wins, finishes, and we'll see you back in the UFC. But right now, and I need to see more on the regional scene. Usman, of course, Thomas beat Usman, so of course I'm going to have Usman on the list. Usman is 35 years old, 3-2, beat Jake Collier, not in the UFC. Zach Ponga, not in the UFC, and a light heavyweight. Jake Collier is also a light heavyweight now. Junior Tafa, I think it's like 2-3 in the UFC, so all losing record or not in the UFC guys. Lost to Mick Parkin, lost to Thomas Peterson, and he's a decisionator. 4 decision fights in a row, not really exciting. I don't think any of those fights were exciting. Let's just be honest. 3-2, not a finisher, a heavyweight, old. Losing to Thomas Peterson is not a good look. Cut him. Bye-bye. See you later. All right, next we move on to, oh, we went a little bit too fast there. Justin Tafa. It's your time to go. It's your time to go. His brother's also on the list. We'll talk about him in a bit. 7-5 record in the UFC is crazy. Cut him. Get 3 wins on the regional scene. 10-5 is a little bit more appealing, but get a win streak together, bud. Get a win streak together. He's 6 foot tall, very short for the heavyweight division. In a lot of boring fights that he's losing to Felipe, to Vandera, to Carl Williams. Beating guys, Juan, not in the UFC. Hunsucker, not in the UFC. Porter, same thing. And be Austin Lane, who is 1-2 in the UFC. You know, what's his overall? 4-5. Cut him. Get a few wins on the regional scene. He's still 31, so he's not necessarily old. Get a more appetizing record. He's 7-5. Get to 10-5. Get to 11-5. Get a lot of knockouts over some not so good competition. But, you know, do that. Beat some guys over there. And if somebody beats you on the regional scene, sign them. But don't have this guy fighting in the UFC when there's a good chance he's just going to get ridden out and out-wrestled and out-grappled by these guys in the UFC heavyweight division. And he's not really UFC caliber anymore. 7-5. Cut him. Bye-bye. All right, we move on. Lucas Brzezinski. He's not horrible in the fact that he beat Walter Walker, which is a very good aging win. And his losses are against the good guys. Martin Bade, a fight a lot of people thought he won. Martin's ranked caliber. Kennedy Nzechukwu is ranked. Mick Parkin is ranked. Waldo is ranked. Carl Williams is the only non-ranked guy, really. Non-ranked caliber. But that's about it. I mean, he's losing to really, really good guys, but come on, 1-5 in the UFC. That's literally all I can say about that. 1-5 in the UFC, getting knocked out in his last 3 losses. Cut him. Make room for him fighting on the card. Instead of him fighting on there, let's go way up to the top because I think that's where the heavyweights are. Instead of him fighting on the card, why not Danilo Voyedvoykin, 7-0? Why don't we put Kennedy Nzechukwu on the card, Jonathan Deniz? Why are we putting Lucas Brzezinski on a UFC fight night when we have these other talented guys? It's heavyweight. You're not cutting weight. These guys can fight way more often. Way more often than they are. Kennedy's trying to fight often. He fought beginning of 2024, tried to fight in October, beat Chris Barnett, fought in December, now he's fighting again in April. He's trying to be active. I want these guys that are legit heavyweights, Rizvan, Jonathan Deniz, Kennedy Nzechukwu, Budai, Mick Parkin, Waldo Cortez. I want them to fight more often, and if Lucas is taking their spot, they're not able to fight. Again, it's another spot on a card that's filled, and they're not able to, so they're postponing. They have to fight a little bit later. Lucas, see ya. All right, we got the other brother, Junior Tafa. We already kind of mentioned this. He's 2-3 in the UFC. He's 28 years old. Similar thing to his brother. Bad record, 6 wins, 3 losses, 2-3 in the UFC. Been finished twice, beat out of the UFC guy and a short notice guy, and nearly lost that fight, let's be honest. Lost to Muhammad Usman as well. It's a horrible look. Get him on the regional scene. Let's get him 4 wins to 10-3, and we'll see you back. You could have 4 fights in a year. You're a heavyweight. You don't cut weight. Go to the regional scene, get 4 fights on regional Australian cards, Asian cards, get a better record. Let's show some grappling improvement, and let's get you back in the UFC. Build that record back up, and we can see you back in. Sean Sharaf, I mean, I like when he gets a short notice shot and he takes advantage of it, and he fights Junior Tafa on short notice, 4 knockouts in a row, but again, he's not UFC caliber. That's just the thing I have to say there. 4-1 is not an amazing record. It's a heavyweight. Sean Sharaf got knocked out. He's a finisher for sure. He's a fun fighter to watch. He's a fun heavyweight to watch, but again, he needs wins on the regional scene. Got to get to 7-1. 7-1, I'd be fine with him getting another shot, another crack at the UFC roster. I was fine with him getting a shot at 4-0, but he lost to Junior Tafa, who I also think isn't really UFC caliber. So let's get him to 7-1 on the regional scene. Get him back in the UFC. There's other guys on the regional scene. I made a video a few days ago on the best unsigned outside of the UFC heavyweights I'd love to see in the UFC instead of Sean Sharaf. Sean, build that record back up, build that hype back up. Get some more finishes. Your last fight was in October, November, December, January, February. Get a fight booked in March or April. On the regional scene, get another one in July, get another one in September, and then get another one in January, then get another shot back in the UFC. All I really got to say. A lot of these cases are they could go back and rebuild themselves. And I have no problem with them getting back in the UFC, but their records aren't very good. Some of them are exciting, some of them aren't, but they need to build that record back up. Marcin Prachnio, another one, some fun fights for sure. He's 36 years old though, 17-8. Not a horrible record, but in the UFC, he's 4-6, has been finished twice in his last 3 fights. Only wins recently, not in the UFC. Lost to a guy that is not in the UFC. Beat Ike Villanueva. I don't know how he beat Khalil Roundtree a few years ago. That's crazy. But let's cut him again. Let's cut him from the UFC. There's other light heavyweights. Just the argument I'm going to use so many times throughout this video. We could easily have more Rodolfo Bellato fights. We can easily have more Dr. Nirgoje fights. More Bruno Lopez. More Jimmy Crute than Marcin Prachnio. I'd rather see a lot of those guys fight. And some of them are taking time off. They're not able to fight as often as they want because Marcin's fighting. So Marcin, let's put you on the regional scene. I don't want you back in the UFC ever. I don't know if that sounds harsh, but keep fighting on the regional scene. I want you to keep fighting because as soon as somebody beats you on the regional scene, sign them. Bring them in the UFC as the replacement. And, everything's hunky-dory. And we got Ivan Urslan. This is simple. This is an easy one for me to kind of debate with you guys. He's 33. He's a little bit older. He's fun. He's got a lot of finishes. Puts on some fun fights. But 2 fights ago, he got knocked out outside of the UFC. Lost to Uron in the UFC. And he's older. Why is he on the roster? Why is he on the roster? We go to the light heavyweight rankings right now. Why aren't we signing, instead of him, some undefeated up-and-comers outside of the UFC? We got 14-0 Muslim Magomedov outside of the UFC. We got 11-0 Shamil Erdogan outside of the UFC. Let's look. We got Ibrahim Chuzigayev on the regional scene. Why not bring this guy in? Why not bring this guy in? Better record, younger, actually on a win streak, winning fights outside of the UFC. I don't understand why they're getting this guy a shot into the UFC roster when, again, we already kind of looked at 3 examples that I'd rather have than Ivan Urslan. My Wi-Fi is going a little bit bad, so I can't fully look at a lot of these. But again, why is Ivan Urslan in the UFC? Short notice to fight Iwan Kutelaba? Yeah. Billy Elikana, again, short notice. Lost to Bogdan Guskov. Split decision on the regional scene 2 fights ago. Lost to Daniel Compton 4 fights ago. 7-2. Not an amazing record. He's still 29 years old. How many times did he fight in 2024? He fought once. Let's see some activity on the regional scene. Let's get 3 fights. Again, all I need, 3 fights on the regional scene, and let's see 3 finishes on the regional scene. 10-2, so more appealing record. 29 years old, so you can still rebound, improve, get better against lesser competition. Because if you fight UFC guys again, you're going to lose. You're not ready for the UFC right now. So 3 more fights on the regional scene, 3 more finishes, get that appetizing 10-2 record, then I would be fine. He'd be 30 years old, and I'd be fine with him getting another crack. We got Toco, 0-2 in the UFC. That's all I really got to say. He's 34 years old. He's 0-2 against good guys. Yes, Umar Sy and Navajo. But on the regional scene, arm injury, win. Beat a 1-7 guy and then decisioned an even record guy. Knocked out by Ming Yang Zhang. Finished by Umar Sy. It was short notice. And then lost to Navajo Sterling in a really, really boring fight. Just not UFC caliber. He's older. Again, Tokos, same argument. I'd rather see Dr. Nirgoje fight more. I'd rather see Ozzy Diaz fight more. Julius Walker fight more. Literally anyone. When is Artem Vatikov going to fight? But Tokos is on the card. Let's put Artem Vatikov on these cards instead of him. Don't know why Tuco's in the UFC. He should be cut. Abdul Razak Alhassan, exciting guy, but again, older guy. We got to cut some of the older guys that are on longer UFC contracts. These guys are being paid more than the undefeated guys on the roster. There's undefeated 10-0 flyweights making less than Abdul, Razak, Alhassan. And they're making the same for the UFC. They're making the same money for the UFC. So, do we need him in the UFC? Probably not. Probably not. The bout rescheduled. He pulled out of this fight. Josh Friends missed weight. So, one of them was his fault. But, again, he hasn't fought very oftenly, 2023, 2022, 2023, 2025. He's fighting once or twice a year. Getting knocked out by Cesar Almeida, getting submitted by Joe Pyfer. 12-7 record, doesn't look good. Losing record in the UFC. He is exciting, but the same argument for Marcin Prachnio is put him on the regional scene. Put him on the regional scene. As soon as he goes there, go to PFL, go to anywhere. But if you go to a regional scene, you start main eventing cards, anybody that beats Abdul, you sign him. It's a good replacement strategy to, see if they are UFC caliber by beating a guy that is on the lower end of things in the UFC. And if he loses on the regional scene, you can sign that guy. But Abdul's 39, losing record in the UFC, 12-7 overall. He's exciting. But again, Abdul Razak Alhassan, nobody is hyped and really looking forward to the future that Abdul Razak Alhassan has in the middleweight division when we could see Jin Young Park on that same card. We could have saw Jin Young Park versus Cesar Almeida. Would have been a bigger fight, better fight. Jacob Malkoun, Christian Leroy Duncan, Edmund Shabazian, let's book these guys. Let's not have Abdul on the card when we could literally shuffle any one of these guys in there instead of Abdul, and we have a bigger, better, more high profile, better record, better fighters against each other. It's just higher level UFC fights. Abdul's not the highest level guy. Cut him. Marc-Andre Barriault, bad record, 3-fight losing streak, 16-9. He's older, 35 years old. I know the reason he's still signed. He's 5-8 in the UFC, 3 losses in a row. Again, I know the reason he is still in the UFC. I know the reason. He's Canadian. But I assure you, I can make a full video on it. A full video. This man's not going to be champion anytime. He's not a good UFC fighter. He's just going to be win one, lose one, win one, lose one. Why don't we sign... I'm forgetting the guy off the top of my head. There is like an 11-1 Canadian on the regional scene fighting in a main event pretty soon. Why don't we sign these guys? What do we need Marc-Andre Barriault? They're going to be just as rooting for and just happy to see Marc-Andre as they are this undefeated guy. Might as well get better high-level guys into the UFC with better records, not losing record 5-8 in the UFC. So, again, it's the same argument as well. I mean, so many middleweights aren't fighting as often as they want. Like Azamat Bekoyev, he wants to fight as early as April. I'm assuming he's probably going to fight in May or July or June because he's just not able to fight as often as he wants. Ismail Nardiev wanted to fight in February or March. It's already February. He's not able to get a fight because the roster's too big. The roster is just too big. So, cut him. Then we got Bruno Silva, another guy, losing record in the UFC. Exciting, yes, but put him on the regional scene. Anybody he loses to, sign him to the UFC. 4 losses in a row. Beat Brad Tavares, which is crazy, but what is he, 1-6 in his last 7? Cut him. All right, we move on. Julian Marquez, again, fun fighter, but he's older. He's 34 years old. Losing record in the UFC. 3 losses in a row, all by knockout in round 1, round 2. Again, cut him. He's on the regional scene. He loses to anybody. You look at that guy really, really good, and you sign him. Dusko Todorovic, same thing. So on a losing streak, losing inside of the UFC to Duncan, Mansour by knockout, Chidi by knockout, Gregory, Punahele. He's 3-5 in the UFC. He's 30 years old, which isn't horrible. He's in his prime still. So 12-5 isn't an absolutely horrible record at all. So I'd love to see him back in the UFC. If he's able to get to 16-5. Again, 4 wins. Let's put on a year. One good year, 2024, 2025. Not 2024. But let's put on 4 wins in a row. Get 4 finishes against lower level guys on the regional scene. You're still 30 years old. Stop taking this damage against UFC caliber guys when you could go get some easy wins on the regional scene, still improve, not take as much damage, get to 16-5, 17-5. That's a good, solid record. It's a solid record. Sign him. Back to the UFC. And again, if he loses to anybody, UFC's got another guy to watch. But Dusko being in the UFC, again, we could have Kazirev fighting, Mansour fighting more, Marco Tulio fighting more. Goes on and on. Robert Berksic shouldn't have been signed in the first place. Let's just be honest. He's 34 years old. Got signed to fight Ihor Potieria. Again, not in the UFC. On a little bit of a win streak here against losing record guy. Not too bad. Like, these aren't bad wins. But he's 34 years old. He is 34 years old. A few years ago, lost to Zenind Polivo. However you say that. 6-4. Lost to Ihor. Why aren't we just cutting him from the UFC? After losing to Ihor Potieria, why are we not just cutting him? And again, doing the same thing. He's going to fight in Octagon again. He's going to go fight on one of these regional shows. As soon as he loses, you're probably going to have a better, younger, better record guy to come join the UFC. Like, no. Why is he in the UFC? We move on. Antonio Tricoli, if you really thought I wasn't going to put this man on the list, 34 years old, 0-2, cancellations galore in this man's fights. Pulled out against Ovi St. Proo, pulled out against Umar Sai. This fight got rebooked, so I'm not too sure what happened there. Shara Magomedov, let's see. He fought him, got knocked out, got submitted by Tresean Gore, was supposed to fight Mansour Abdul Malik, but again, he withdrew. He's pulling out of all these fights. He's got a losing record. He's old. Cut him. God damn. Why? Why are we keeping this man around? Why? Jose Medina, 0-2 against UFC fighters in Zach Reese as well as Magomed Gadziazulov. Not a very good record. 11-4. He's 33 years old. Cut him. Like, why? Why? Like, why? I know it's for the reason you want to prop up Ate Bagatier, but why can't we just sign somebody that's actually good for Ateba to fight, another 7-0, 6-1 fighter for Ateba to fight, instead of an 0-2 guy in Jose Medina? I know he's got the country of Bolivia, and Dana White loves him because he showed a lot of heart. Cut him. Like, come on. Trevon Giles, this is one of the better guys I'm going to cut, but he's on a little bit of a skid right now. Finished by Gabriel Bonfim, Carlos Prates, Mike Mallet. This is the murderous row of prospects in the welterweight division. Parsons has a losing record. Kosi is out of the UFC. Also lost the good guys, Drickus and Michael Morales. Beat Roman Dolidze, but, you know, winning record in the UFC. His wins aren't very exciting. He loses, and the fact that those fights are exciting are because of his opponent, Gabriel and Prates. The Parsons fight really wasn't that fun. The Mike Mallet fight really wasn't that fun. So, what's the point? What is the point of keeping a veteran around? Again, 32 years old, he's probably going to keep fighting. If he loses to anybody, bring him into the UFC. Right back in. Then we got, who is this? Preston Parsons, the man he beat. It's an obvious choice, of course. I talked to Preston. I like Preston. 29 years old. This is a simple case of go back to the regional scene. You're 11-6. Again, not a very good UFC record to have. 2-4 inside of the UFC, got knocked out by Jacoby, only beat out of the UFC guy and a lightweight in Evan Elder, got knocked out here, got knocked out there, lost to Giles, lost to Oban. These are good guys. D-Rod's solid, Oban is solid, Jacoby is solid, Trevon is not bad either. These are solid guys, but let's rebound. Let's go back to the regional scene where you were killing it. Submission, all in a few years right there. Let's get back to the regional scene. 3 wins, 4 wins, 5 wins. I'd like to see him legitimately get to like 18-6. I think we got to put some work in. 17-6 would be fine. 17-6 would be fine. Let's get 6 wins on the regional scene. That's a solid looking record. 29 years old. 6 wins is like a year and a half. 2 years. He'll be 31 years old at the time. Let's build him back up on the regional scene. Get some finishes. Build up some hype. Again, protect that chin because you're not going to be fighting these guys that are as good. So build up that record again, and we can see you back in. Kanan Song, I know he's from China, but we have a lot of China representatives now. we actually do have a lot of Chinese representatives in the UFC. We don't need the veteran Chinese guys that have pretty lucrative contracts with the UFC, beating non-UFC fighters. All of these wins right here, not in the UFC. Bodoya is 0-3 in the UFC. Ricky Glenn is no longer in the UFC. I think we should cut him. I know he's 6-5 in the UFC overall, which isn't horrible. He's losing to solid guys, but again, would rather see, like, I'm gonna bring this argument to my grave. Would rather see some of the higher level welterweights fight more often. Would love to see Jacoby Smith fight way more often. Would love to have seen Chaos Williams be more active. To see Li Jingliang fight instead of Kanan Song. Li Jingliang was offered a fight on that China card. I'd rather see Li Jingliang versus Muslim Salikov again. Like, I know that fight already happened, but you kind of get what I'm saying. I'd rather see Jingliang on a card than Kanan. It raises that card's overall. Like, overall, a card is better when you got Li Jingliang over Kanan Song. Angelosa, I think he's 2-2 in the UFC. Just a decision guy. He's 30 years old, 10-4. Again, not a horrible record, but not a good one. 2-2 in the UFC. Lost to a guy that's not in the UFC. Beat Reys Mck, who's like 0-4 in the UFC. AJ's not in the UFC. Lost a battle that got turned into a no contest. And then Gabriel Bonfim. So he's got basically a losing record in the UFC. Every fight's going to a decision. When is the last time this man's got a finish? Like 9 years ago. Cut him. All right, we move on. Again, 10-4. Get to 14-4 on the regional scene, and we'll see about. And finish fights on the regional scene. Again, finish fights. You're 30 years old, finish fights on the regional scene. We can see you back. Francisco Prado, welterweight. 22 years old, 12-3. Not a bad record, but he's 1-3 in the UFC. Beat Atman Azaitar, which is nice. Doesn't get finished, and he's very, very young. He's UFC caliber. I will give him that. He is UFC caliber, but he's so young. 22 years old. Get him back on the regional scene. Get him on a win streak against these lower level guys that he was having fun with, knocking out in round 1, finishing everybody on a tear on that regional scene, fighting 1, 2, 3, 4 times in 2022. Get 4 wins on the regional scene. Maybe 5. Get to 17-3. Get to 16-3. Let's get him back in the UFC after that. But let's get some hype back on Prado. Then we got Tim Means. Again, another veteran. I'd rather see some of these younger guys fight. He's 1-5 in his last 5. Only win is Fialio, who's not in the UFC. He is UFC caliber. It's just the record's not amazing. Nobody's really like, oh, Tim Means is on the card. It's going to be awesome. I'd rather see Jacoby Smith. Again, Adam Fugi, he's 2-2 in the UFC. He just got injured. I don't know. It's interesting because he didn't have any injuries before this, but this is the time he's canceling a fight with Billy Ray Goff here. He pulled out due to injury. Beat Yusaku, who's 0-2 in the UFC. Josh is not in the UFC. Lost 2 fights, and he's 36 years old. Again, put him outside of the UFC. Anybody that beats him, sign him. Gilbert Urbina. Let's look at him. 28 years old, 7-3 record. Horrible. It's not a good record. Let's put him on the regional scene. He's 1-2 in the UFC. Let's put him on the regional scene. Get him to 11-3. 11-3 is not too much to ask for. A year, 2 years. Get him a little wins. Get him some finishes. He's 28. Stop putting him against UFC guys. Get him on a win streak. Better record. Get him back in the UFC. Wellington Turman, he should have been cut a long time ago. Let's be honest here. 28 years old. Same thing with Gilbert Urbina. Should be outside of the UFC. He's 3-6 in the UFC overall on a 3-fight losing streak. Again, this guy's not in the UFC. That just beat him. Why is he in the UFC? He hasn't fought since 2023. He's just taken up a roster spot at this point. 28 years old. A lot of improvement you can definitely make. 18-8 isn't a horrible record. Let's just build yourself back up. Get a few wins on the regional scene. Get to 21-8. And maybe we can see you back. You're still young. Still improving. Anybody that beats you again, sign him to the UFC. Mickey Gall is 7-7 in the UFC. He's on a losing streak for days. Morono, Mallet, Basil Hafez, Ramiz Brahimai. And his record is 7-7. That is not a UFC caliber record. Bye-bye. Reys Mck, 0-4, 0-5 in the UFC. It's very simple. 2 losses in a row. Why is he still in? I know he got 0-2 in his first stent, got on a win streak on the regional scene. 0-2 in his second stent. Let's put him back on the regional scene again. 29 years old. He can honestly build himself back up a third time. And again, if anybody beats him, we can sign them as well. Who is this? Kiefer Crosby. Kiefer's 0-2. He's 34 years old. He got finished twice in round 1. That's all I gotta say. What else do I need to say there? Yusaku Kinoshita, 0-2 in the UFC. Very young, 24 years old, 6-3 record. Let's get that to 11-3. Let's get that to 11-3. You're young. Build up that record on the regional scene. Get back in a few years. Pete Rodriguez, 1-2 in the UFC. Overall record, 5-2 is not good. 28 years old. Same thing. Back on the regional scene. Build up that record to 9-2, 10-2. And we can see you back in if you show some good promise and some finishes. Joaquim Silva, out of the UFC. 36 years old. 6-5 in the UFC isn't bad. But not exciting fights. Clay Guida fight wasn't that fun. Drakkar Klose fight wasn't that fun. So recently not being in fun fights, and he just pulled out of the fight with Rafa Garcia. Perfect time to cut him. Perfect time to cut him. Utman Azaitar, is he 1-3? Is he 1-3? Let's check. 2-3 in the UFC. 3 knockout losses in a row. Cut him. That's literally all I gotta say. I don't know how old he is. 35. Yeah, come on. Cut this man. 5'8" for a lightweight also is crazy. Then we got Rolando Bedoya. I was about to say Rodolfo Bedoya, but it's Rolando. 28 years old. UFC caliber for sure. Had a close fight with Chaos, but 0-3 in the UFC. Is young. Let's get to 18-4, and we'll see you back in the UFC once you're in your prime, 30 years old. Just build up a win streak. Austin Hubbard, 1-2 in the UFC on his second stint. Lost to Holloway, lost to Hernandez. Beat Figlak, who isn't in the UFC. His first stint in the UFC didn't do good either. 1-1, lost 1, 1-1, lost 1, that type of thing. He's 4-6 in the UFC overall. He's 33 years old. Cut him. Cut him. Anybody that beats him on the regional scene, sign him. Lando Venata. A lot of cancellations and not an amazing record. 4-7-2 in the UFC. I think he pulled out a Mike Breeden fight. He pulled out of the James Lontop fight. Let's see Andre Fili. He pulled out of that one due to injury. And then this fight got rebooked. So he's pulling out of a lot of fights. He's on a losing streak. 4-7-2 overall. Cut him. Bye-bye. Damir Hadjovic fought recently. Got finished. 38 years old. 4-6 in the UFC. 2 losses in a row. Lost to a guy that's not in the UFC. Simple as that. Cut him. Roosevelt Roberts. He's 0-2 on his second stint in the UFC. He's in his prime, 31 years old. But Hubbard, Rebecki, Klein, all beating him. Regional scene. Anybody beats you, they'll get signed. But 12-5, not a great record. Get him on the regional scene and build yourself back up. Landon Quinones, 0-2 in the UFC, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, 0-2. That's literally it. 29 years old. Lost on the Ultimate Fighter also to Jason Knight. So he's basically 0-3 in his last 3 fights. 29 years old. 7-3-1. Not an amazing record. Get to 11-3-1. Maybe we'll re-sign you, but the record's not good. 3 losses in a row. Yeah, cut. Darius Flowers, 0-3 in the UFC is all I gotta say. That's I don't even have to look at his topology. Victor Martinez, I think 0-2 in the UFC, if I'm remembering correctly. 33 years old and got finished twice. Very inactive. 2023, 2024. Didn't fight in 2022. Fought once in 2021. Didn't fight in 2020. Really, really inactive. Why is he in the UFC? I don't know. The Trevor Peak fight, let's see, he withdrew from that one. Jordan Levitt, he withdrew. He's canceling fights, he's pulling out of fights, and he's losing. Cut him. Let's move on. Mitch Ramirez, I think he's 0-1, but he also lost in the Contender series. He's 32 years old as well. He's fighting Ahmed Hazanzada, so we'll see what happens there. But after that fight, I think Ahmed wins, and I think he should be cut after that for sure. We got Mashrabjan Ruziboyev. He got signed to fight on short notice, then pulled out on the day of the weigh-ins. He's not UFC caliber. I watched his regional fights, and I watched looking at the guys he's fighting are not good. No. Cut. Alex Reyes. Does he have a win? Does he have 1 win at least? He's 0-3. Yeah, 0-3. 2 knockout losses and then 1 decision loss to Tom Nolan. A lot of cancellations as well. 38 years old. Cut him. Who is this? Muhammad Yahya? 0-2 in the UFC. Got knocked out by Coway. Lost to Trevor Peak. I think he pulled out against Brendan Moreau. Or no, Moreau pulled out. But yeah, Muhammad Yahya cut him. Like, why was he in the UFC to begin with? Just to fight on the Abu Dhabi card? That's about it. Cut him. Jamal Emmers, not a good UFC record. I think he's got a 4-5, if I'm remembering. 3-4, close enough. 3-4, beat a guy that I don't think should be in the UFC. Beat a guy that's not in the UFC, not in the UFC, not in the UFC. Losing to good guys, but he's 35 years old. Cut him. Then we move on. Sungwoo Choi, he's a very, very fun fighter to watch. Again, another fighter. Totally happy with him fighting on the regional scene. Anybody that beats him, sign him. Beat Jarno, who's not in the UFC. Lost to Chazano, who's not in the UFC. Cut him. Like, recently he's not doing too hot. His chin's not looking amazing. He's fun. He's fun to watch, but 32 years old. I'm sure you can find a better suited featherweight that has a better record, that's younger, that's outside of the UFC from South Korea to replace him. Con Offley, 0-2 in the UFC. Cut him. That's all I gotta say. Crone Gracie. You guys know what I believe about Crone Gracie. 36 years old. Fights like once a year, less than. 3 losses in a row. Beat Alex in a fluke. Cut him. Like, what is he still on the roster for? I don't know. Dennis Bazuki, I think he's 1-2. 27 years old. 1-2 inside of 1-3. That's even worse. 1-3. 27 years old. Not a horrible record. But let's build him up on the regional scene. Again, let's get to 16-5, 17-5. Let's get some finishes on the regional scene and get you re-signed. You're still young. A lot of improvement to come. Timmy Kwamba, 0-2 in the UFC. I think he's still young as well. 26 years old. Lost to Oki and Lucas Almeida. 8-3, not a very great record. Let's get you to 12-3. Back on the regional scene. Still young. Let's get some wins together. Let's get some finishes together. Back in very, very soon. Jekka, 1-2 in the UFC. Lost to Anshul Jubli. That's the only argument I can really make there. Lost to Anshul Jubli. And then lost to Weston, who's was 0-2 at the time. Beat Lucas Alexander. That's about it. I think Lucas should be cut as well. He's also on the list. Is he next? Yeah, Lucas Alexander. Ladies and gentlemen, 1-3. Submitted, knocked out. Only beat Steven, who's not in the UFC. Cut him. Okay. All I gotta say, come on. Connor Matthews, 0-2? 0-3? 0-2. 0-2 in the UFC. 0-3 overall because he lost to Francis Marshall and Contender. Getting finished twice in a row by knockout. Getting knocked out by Dennis Bazukia. Not an amazing look in my opinion. Cut him. Then we got Steven Eugen. I was trying to remember the name. Steven Eugen. I think he's got 0-1. Yeah, lost to Jarno. Jarno's not in the UFC. He beat AJ Cunningham. How old is he? 31. I would say cut him, and anybody that beats him gets in. But I don't want to see him back in the UFC ever. Because he's 31 years old. And again, he lost to Jarno Aarons. He's not decision Theo Realang. Not super active either. Didn't fight once in 2022. Fought once in 2023. Fought once in 24. Cut him. Who do we got? Eric Silva, 0-2 in the UFC. Why is he in there? I think he's older as well. Manolo Zeccini, 0-1. Got knocked out by Morgan Charrier. Just cut him. Like, why? Why are these guys still in here? Cody Stamen. Let's look at him real quick. On a little bit of a skid. 3 losses in a row. Douglas, Taylor Lapilus, Damon Blackshear beat 2 guys I don't think are UFC caliber anymore. Out of the UFC and should be cut. 7-1 overall. 35 years old. Let's cut him. Let's move on. Vince Morales, I think 3-6. 3-7. Ooh, that's worse. My bad. Did great on the regional scene. Did really, really good on the regional scene. This dude is UFC caliber. I will say that from the rooftops. He is the caliber of a UFC fighter. But 16-9 is not a great record. You're 1 away from having double-digit losses. Again, great on the regional scene. Was on a streak. But everybody he beat in the UFC wasn't UFC caliber, but Ayman Zahabi. And that's before the kind of resurgence of Ayman Zahabi. I think Vince Morales should just serve as like a gatekeeper outside of the UFC. Again, He's a beast. He is a beast. But if anybody beats Vince on the regional scene, dude, that's a guy you want to sign. That's a guy you want to sign. But to fight inside of the UFC still, again, when the Bantamweight division is just way too big, I can't do it. Dan Argueta, like 1-3-2 in the UFC. Cut him. Aoriqi Leng. Let's pull him up. 3-4-1. Not in the UFC wins, or literally all of his are not in the UFC. Losing to flyweights, Cody and Jeff Molina, which they're not bad. Lost to Ayman Zahabi as well, and Raul Rosas Jr. He's 31, 25-12. I would just like to see him out of the UFC. There's better guys, higher level guys with more personality that deserve to fight more than him in the UFC. 0-1, lost to a guy that's not in the UFC in his debut on short notice. He's a little bit older as well. Should be cut. We move on. We got a lot more to go through. We still got like 40. Kang Lee, 0-2 in the UFC. Stepped in on short notice in his debut. Did good. Then he got knocked out after that. He's a little bit older as well. I think he's like 34, 33. I'd say cut him. Kalan Lafren, I'm very, very sure that this man should be cut. Why is he on the UFC still? Because he's Irish. 1-2 in the UFC. Beat Pacheco, lost to Taylor, and lost to Jake Hadley. That's not a good look at all. I say cut him. And again, get some finishes on the regional scene. 9-2 isn't a horrible record, but let's get you some wins on the regional scene. You're still 28. Improve and get better and come back, ladies and gentlemen. Then we got Rani Yaya. Very good. Like I will say this right now. 13-6 in the UFC is such a great record. This dude beat some good guys in his day. Fought Ricky Simone, Montel Jackson, Victor Henry. He's 2 losses in a row, and he's a guy that I wholeheartedly believe if you put him in any UFC fight right now, he's going to take out a prospect, and I don't want that. Rani Yaya is going to be a fraud check for a lot of guys. Like, he would beat Peyton Talbot. He'd beat a lot of other guys that everybody's high on in the Bantamweight division. I don't want that. He's 40 years old also. Not a very active fighter. I just cut him to save the prospects. Let's do that. Chad and Helliger lost to Jose Johnson. That's the main argument I can make. He's 38 years old, lost to Jose, 1-3 in his last 4. Only win was Charalampus, who's not in the UFC anymore. Not in the UFC anymore. Why is he in the? Why is he still on the roster? I don't know. But yeah, cut him. Christian Quinones, I think he's 0-2. I don't think he has a win, right? 1-2. Khalid Taha, I forgot about that. Yeah, cut him. How old is he? 28. 18-5 is not a bad record. Let's get some wins on the regional scene and come back. Steven Kozlow fought once against Cameron Simon, lost. 28 years old. Wasn't ready for the UFC when he took the fight. Get some wins on the regional scene. Everybody fought was a losing record guy or an even record guy. Let's get him back on the regional scene and build back up. 28 years old. Still young. Carlos Vera, 0-1 in the UFC and in his mid-30s. That's all I got to say. 0-2, Simon Oliveira. And he's older as well. I think 33. Yeah, 33 years old. Good record, but get him outside the UFC. Anybody that beats him, sign him. Then we got Bayer. How do I say this guy's name? Bayer Gang Gilaisi. 19-6. Young, but he lost on the finale of Road to UFC against Su Young Yu. Wasn't a very fun fight. Beat a lot of guys on the regional scene. And again, not very, very fun fights. I don't think he's UFC caliber. It's as simple as that. I don't think he's UFC caliber. Then we got Cortavius Romius. I think he's 0-1 in the UFC. Also, 1-1 on the Contender. He beat Michael Imperato, who's not good, and he wasn't even able to finish him. Then he lost to Ramon Tavares. I cut him. Like, he's young as well, I think, right? No, he's not. He's 31. He's 31. Cut him. He's 5'4". Cut him. Anybody that beats him again, sign him. But no, like the bantamweight division is way too big right now. I gotta really start making cuts to this bantamweight division. Then we got Su Young Yu. Again, I would cut him. He's a decisionator. And Dastan Amangeldi beat him like a year or two ago. 8-1 Kazakh fighter. Beat him and got a win after that as well. Finished him in round 3. Guillotine. Got all these other wins. Why don't we sign Dastan, who's more of a finisher, and beat him? Sign him instead. Cut him, sign Dastan. All I gotta say. He's not a fun fighter to watch. Luan Lacerda, let's check him out. I think he's 32? 32, 0-2 in the UFC, though. Lost to Stamen, who I also think should be cut. Lost to Blackshear. Hasn't fought since 2023. Why is he still on the roster? Let's cut him. Sorry about that. My nose is a little bit stuffed. Sorry about that. Toshiomi Kazama, 27 years old, 11-4. Not a horrible record. Beat Chara Lampus. Lost to Rinya by knockout. Lost to Garrett Armfield by finish as well. I feel like he's in the UFC a little bit too early. He's still 27. I feel like you get him to 15-4 on the regional scene, get him some easy wins, some layups, and get him back in the UFC. But right now, I feel like he's in way too early. He's like the bottom 3 worst bantamweights right now in the UFC. He's in too early. He's a Japanese guy, so I know the Japanese fans are very happy that he's in the UFC. But you know, he's in there way too early. Let's get him on a win streak again. AJ Cunningham, 0-2. I think 30 years old, 0-1, but also lost in Contender to Steven, who's 0-1 in the UFC. Then he got knocked out by Klein, which is crazy because he's about to fight in the Bantamweight division, but he fought Ludovic Klein at lightweight, which is crazy. But why is he in the UFC in the first place? Just because he got a short notice opportunity. That's it. That's all. Shouldn't be in the UFC. Not caliber enough. Angel Pacheco, not UFC caliber. Simple enough. Lost in the Contender and lost in the UFC. Lost to Kalan Loughran. Kalan is not UFC caliber. Neither are you. Carlos Hernandez. He's solid. He's not horrible, but he's 31 years old, 3-3. He decisions pretty much every win he gets. Yeah, that's about it. Decisionator, 31 years old. Even record in the UFC. Yeah, I'd rather see some of the other undefeated, better guys fight more often. And the guy he just beat, I don't want him either. Niem Jargul, 26 years old. Let's build him back up. You lost to Carlos. You're not UFC caliber. Let's keep improving. You got a split decision 2 fights before the UFC. Let's rebound you on the regional scene. You pulled out of your Hyunsung Park fight due to missing weight. You pulled out of the Andre Lima fight. You're a pullout. And you lost in your debut. 26 years old, still time to improve. Back to the regional scene, get some wins together, back in the UFC. CJ, he's old, and he's got a losing record. 12-6-1, 33 years old, 3-4 in the UFC. 2 losses in a row. Cut him. Anybody that beats him, sign him. Ode Osborne also has beaten CJ Vergara, but I still want him gone. 33 years old, overall UFC record of 4-6, 3 losses in a row. Cut him. He beat Charles Johnson. That was a robbery. Let's just get that straight. Should be on a 5-fight losing streak. Lost to Tyson Nam, who's not in the UFC. Cut him. Come on, guys. Come on. Felipe Bunes. Got a win. He's coming off a win over a guy that's not in the UFC. He's 35 years old. Shouldn't have been signed in the first place. Cut him. Again, why are we having a 35-year-old in the UFC when we have all these other prospects that I want to see fight? I don't want to see Felipe fight. Jimmy Flick, another older guy, losing record in the UFC, 34 years old, 2-3, losing to Nate, who's not in the UFC, getting finished by Costa and Charles, beating guys that aren't in the UFC like Malcolm Gordon. Cut him. Anybody that beats you on the regional scene, again, sign him. That's all I gotta say. Kevin Borjas, 0-2, I think, got finished in both of them. Josh Van decisioned them, okay? And then Alessandro Costa finished him by knockout. He was on a 4-fight win streak. 1 on the Contender, but it was a decision. A decision on the Contender, and he got signed. I don't know. I don't think he was ready. He's not ready for the UFC. He's still young, I believe, right? 27, 9-3. Get him to 13-3. Get him 4 wins on the regional scene. Still young. Rebound. Again, I'd rather see some of these other prospects. Mitch Raposo, 0-1 on the Contender and 0-1 in the UFC. Beat 3-2 Jay Viola, 7-4, 2-1 guy, 4-3. Just was not ready for the UFC. Is not UFC caliber. Cut him. How old is he right now? 26. Again, 9-2 is not a horrible record. Improve on the regional scene. Get that record up. Improve, and maybe we'll get another short notice call. But I don't want to just see you fight again in the UFC. Again, Mitch Raposo is fighting Sumudarji at UFC 314. Why? Why are we getting him versus Sumo Darji when could just as easily do Azat Maksum versus Sumo Darji? I could just as easily do Donghoon Choi, Sumo Darji, Hyun-Sung Park. I'd rather see Leonard Kavanaugh, Sumo Darji than freaking way at the bottom over here, Mitch Raposo. Why? Like, yeah. Proo Sahota, 0-1 in the UFC, lost on the finale of Road to UFC, got knocked out badly. He's just not UFC caliber. We got Haley Cowan. I think she's 0-1. 0-1 in the UFC. She's a pullout as well. Had an illness in that fight. Her opponent pulled out on that one. She got injured, pulled out on that fight, and got injured and pulled out on that fight. And I think she missed weight on this as well. She weighed at 137.5, so she missed weight. She's 0-1, and she's a pullout. Cut her. Bye. I don't like pullouts, and I don't like weight missers. And you got a losing record. Bye. See you later. We got Marina Moroz, focused on her OnlyFans career. Bye. 33 years old, bad record, even record in the UFC. Cut her. Anybody that beats her outside of the UFC, sign them to the UFC. Angela Hill, crazy losing streak. What is she on? 5? 6? 5 losses in a row. All by decision, which is crazy. No finishes. I at least lose by finish, so there's some excitement there. But no. I don't know how she got a split with Macy Barber. Let's cut her. Again, 5-8 in the UFC overall. Anybody that beats you on the regional scene, sign them. Same. Julia Soliarenko, I think she's 2-6. I swear to God. 2-6 in the UFC. Cut her. Like, Jesus Christ. Priscilla Cachoeira. What is she in the UFC? I don't remember. I do not. 4-6. A little bit better than the last one. But, yeah, she puts on fun fights, but she's 36. Again, cut her. Anybody that beats her, sign them. Brogan Walker, 0-2 in the UFC. Lost to Juliana Yasmin. Her record overall is 7-4. She's 35 years old. Cut her. Bye-bye. Then we got Carla Judis, 0-1, I think, in the UFC. Lost in the Contender as well. She's fun to watch. I'll say that. She's just not UFC caliber yet. 3-2 record. Improve her. Get better on the regional scene. Get a good record and maybe resign in a few years, but right now, no. Poliana Viana, 4-6 in the UFC. Getting finished twice in a row in her last 2. She's going to lose to Jacqueline Amorim as well. Cut her after that fight. Diana Belbita, losing record in the UFC. 28 years old. 2-5 in the UFC. 2 losses in a row. Gonna lose to Dione Barboza, in my opinion. Beat Hannah and Maria, who are not in the UFC. She's 28. Back on the regional scene. Get some wins together. Back in the UFC. Montserrat Rendon. Or not. That's the Bantamweight. Montserrat Ruiz. 10-4. Not a horrible record, but 3 losses in a row. 3 knockout losses in a row. That's all I gotta say. Come on. And the only girl she was able to beat, Cheyenne Velismas. 2-2 in the UFC. Beat not in the UFC Gloria, not in the UFC Mallory. Lost to Ruiz, and lost to another girl that's not in the UFC. So, cut her as well. Alice Ardeline, 0-1 in the UFC. She got a short notice shot, but she's 9-7. Like, that's her record, not UFC level. Estela Nunes, 0-4 in the UFC. Why is she still in? I don't know. What is this? Marnik Man, 0-2 in the UFC, 0-1 in the Contender. Cut her. And then Ryani Amanda. Last but not least, in the women's strawweight division, 14-8, not a good record. She fights at atom weight, so she's really, really small, and she's 0-2 in the UFC. But that's about it. 9? 109 fighters I would cut right now. There's more. I promise you I could find more if I really wanted to scrutinize it. But I'm giving them some leeway. I'm giving the other fighters a little bit of leeway from being cut. Let's look to this weekend. Because I will be making they should be cut post after this weekend. Nick Klein, if he loses, I'll be making he should be cut from the UFC, and he'll be added to the list. Nikolay Vertinikov, if he loses, he's on the list. Eric Makanico, if he loses, he's on the list. Rafael Circuiera, he's on the list. So we could potentially have 4 more fighters added. 4 more fighters added after this weekend. We'll see what happens. Thank you guys for watching. That's everybody that should be cut. Again, there's going to be more after this weekend. 100% guarantee you. I'm going to add more guys and girls very, very soon. What's the week after this? Cap versus Almavayo. That's 2 weeks later. Cody Brundage, Julian Marquez. Julian Marquez is already on the list. So he's for sure going to stay on the list. Win or lose, I don't care. And if Cody loses, he's added to the list. Hyder, William, Austin Lane, if he loses, he's added to the list. Montana De La Rosa, if she loses, she's added to the list. Lucas Almeida, if he loses, he's added to the list. Andrea's already on the list. Douglas Silva de Andrade, if he loses, he's on the list. Ladies and gentlemen, that's more. That's more cuts. Dude, I'm going to be making this list 200 fighters long very, very soon. Let's look on to UFC 313. Let's see if there's anybody I would cut. No, this is a good card. There's nobody on this card. Actually, Ozzy Diaz, I forgot. Ozzy Diaz, if you lose to Jordan Santos, you're cut. But only one. Only one for 313, so not horrible. Not a bad card. I'm not going to cut too many guys or girls on that one. This next one, Josiani, if she loses, she's cut. Priscilla's cut no matter what. Carlos Vera's going to be cut. Brendan Ribeiro, if you lose, cut. Sam Hughes is iffy because she'll be 9-7. Overall, UFC record to be 4-6. But you got the Jacqueline Marin win. You got the Elise Reed win. That's tough. That is tough. She's got such a hard schedule in the UFC. Possibly. She's a tough one. Because she's a good gatekeeper to prove if you're legit in women's strawweight. So yeah, if she loses, possibly. Carly Judice, she's already on the list. If Unazi loses to Judice, Unazi's on the list. She's on the list. Ryan, Danny Perez, if he loses, he's on the list. Sung is already on. AJ and Su Young Yu, both of them should be cut. Alexander Hernandez, if he loses, he's on. Cody Gibson, if he loses, he's on. So yeah, a lot of cuts to be had in the weeks to come. But thank you guys for watching. If I was too harsh, comment down below. If I wasn't, comment down below. I don't care. Cut some fighters. Let's go.